Hi, everybody. The purpose of this very short video, maybe about 10 minutes, is going to be to give you basically an idea of what happened after the Haitian Revolution, a little bit before, after the Haitian Revolution, and then how we got to some of the problems in Latin America that are going to occur in Mexico and Brazil, and then what we're going to call the Bolivarian revolutions. Okay, a lot of this is stuff that also involves questions and stuff, and this is really going to be for those of you that weren't able to make it to class today for whatever reason, to also be able to cover this stuff. Okay, so this is really about the transatlantic revolutions and the fervor of revolution spreading to the New World. And what you see on the front is an image of the Haitian Revolution, which is really the quintessential one we're going to talk about here. We'll get to some of the other ones a little bit later on, but we first have to introduce Napoleon on the other side of the Atlantic in order for those to make sense. And the Haitian Revolution is famous because it's the only known major modern example of a successful slave rebellion in which people overthrew their white masters and took over basically Haiti for themselves, the black slaves. Now, the first thing to keep in mind is that the ideas of the Enlightenment are going to come to the Americas right around the same time as Europe. Basically, between now and essentially 1900 to maybe even more like 1920, 1930. Everything is essentially going to be like European first and then American. Like French peninsulars and Creoles were very famously slaves to European fashion ideas, culture, etc., well into the 20th century. As a matter of fact, there's going to be a whole movement in the late 1800s known as the Our America movement, led by Cuban patriot Jose Marti, that's going to try to get rid of that. Right, and the intellectual atmosphere is one that wants a more free society, a looser caste system, an end to slavery, kind of, but never really had the stomach to do it. Less influence in the church, etc., etc. And when I say that, I mean the intellectual atmosphere. I'm talking about the bourgeoisie, the people up top, not necessarily the people down below as much. Um, but the problem was is that a lot of this they couldn't necessarily do because if they got rid of slavery, who would produce resources. They liked having money. They liked having ties to the church and state because they were so used to that in Spain, etc., etc. And the American and French revolutions really showed that it was possible to throw off the yoke of some of these things and to have more popular sovereignty. Those were really the ideas that came forward here. Popular sovereignty being that people get to choose where they want to or who they want to be governed by. And then the French Revolution perpetuates the idea that Europeans are ready for the Enlightenment and that they are able to get rid of these things and stuff like this. And so the first major revolution in the Americas, aside from the United States Revolution, the American Revolution, occurs in Haiti. So the first one that we're going to study, okay? And this story starts in Port-au-Prince, which is actually the capital of Haiti. I've actually been there once in the mid-90s, when one of the few times that Haiti was not having severe problems. And it's an absolutely gorgeous city. It's very colorful, as you can tell. It's a fairly impoverished city to a certain extent, but it also represents kind of the beginnings of one of the places that Columbus first founded in the Americas, and then also some of the first places that were able to throw off the uh, the um, the colonialism here, if that makes sense. And so it actually has a lot of historical significance, even though it might not be the wealthiest or nicest city going right now. Now, these next two slides are slides about the article I had you read on the Haitian Revolution. They're slides that we talked about in groups in class. If you were not able to make it to class, you should answer the questions and submit them on Canvas so that you can catch up on that. But all I'm going to do is just give you about 2 seconds on each of these slides. You can pause it there and then go on to kind of the next part. And these slides basically get you the information that you need to know on the Haitian Revolution. This is in lieu of me lecturing or something like that. I like to mix up how we get information here. And so, if you know what's on these slides, you're in good shape for the Haitian Revolution. And then the last little part of this lecture, we'll talk about kind of what happened between there and the end part. So after Haiti is able to take control, this is essentially what Latin America looks like right before the revolutions that are going to occur. Now, the vast majority of it is ruled by Spain. As you can see, Brazil is Portuguese. This goes back to something called the Treaty of Tordesillas and dividing up the world from a long time ago. But essentially, Spain has divided stuff into a number of kingdoms this way. And as you guys know, they're ruling with an iron fist, right? And to tie stuff back in right here, be the time of Tupac Amaru and stuff like that that we talked about in our kind of entry thing. And I just have him back up here to like give you an idea. And what we're going to spend the next 3 slides, and this is why I said it's going to be real short, is just talking about some of the problems going on in South America and how they relate to what's going on in Europe. Because we've already heard that like rebellions starting to occur, like, you know, there's disgruntledness. You've seen Tupac Amaru, you've seen the issues between the Peninsulars and the Creoles and the Mestizos and the natives and the African slaves and stuff like that. And now we need to talk about the actual like hardcore problems here. Um, so the two biggest problems are really going to be the sense of nationalism and the sense of the caste system. Okay, and the first one is going to be that the caste system really perpetuates the haves and have-nots, as like this hierarchy that we've talked about and seen put in place and stuff like that, and then the racism and then the classism and stuff like that. Well, the caste system really like makes movement hard. Honor system makes discussion about it tough, makes movement between the classes and the castes hard, etc., etc. And like what happens is you see people who are like um, who are able to get rid of that in places like Haiti and places like the United States and stuff like that. And there's a little bit of like of like jealousy. Hey, we can do that too. Like France has done that, gotten rid of that. We've done that. Like we can also do that too. There's also the fact that the Creoles, the people born in the Americas, were starting to feel a stronger sense of nationalism and a stronger tie to the place they were born than like the actual like country. And you can see this even with like stuff in our founding fathers. I mean, Jefferson routinely refers to himself as a Virginian, not an Englishman prior to this, and even after the United States, he still often refers to himself as that, right? So the Creoles felt like that they basically had built the country, they had gotten power, they or not gotten power. They had built the country, they had built the economy, they liked it here, they were the real like inhabitants, etc., etc., and they felt like they were ruled by a foreign power, and they felt like the peninsulars keep like kind of like pushing them down, right? And the lower classes felt like kind of screwed by both of them. But as I said earlier, while they're going to be involved in this, much like the French Revolution, this isn't their hardcore revolution. This isn't where they're going to be able to rise up. They're going to think they're going to be able to. They're going to be involved in the revolution, stuff like that. But this isn't their time to be able to be like, yep, we actually are going to be successful here. And so those issues with the Creoles and the caste system and the honor system, and the fact that like Spain and Portugal are really using absolute power way more than other countries, like England, France, etc., etc. There's almost no infrastructure. England sets up like universities and schools and stuff like that. In all of Brazil, there is one university put up by Portugal, right? And I think in Spanish America there are like 3 total or something like that. And the long and the short of it is that all the serious money is going back to Europe, right? And with the American Revolution, with the French Revolution, and with the Haitian Revolution, people start to get even more disgruntled. Now, meanwhile, and this is really tough because it's one of those things where you've got two things happening at the exact same time, okay? Meanwhile, as we're going to talk about, but we haven't really much, after the French Revolution, a man by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte is able to take control of France. And eventually, to make a long story short, and we'll go back in time a little bit and get Napoleon's story in a bit, Napoleon moves on the Iberian Peninsula. And if you don't know your geography and you haven't done your geography quiz like I told you to for fun, you really should do that, by the way. But the Iberian Peninsula is the peninsula that Spain and Portugal are on, right? And when Napoleon conquers the Iberian Peninsula, he makes his brother the King of Spain, which upsets a bunch of people for a number of reasons. But more than anything, what this does is it really makes the people in Latin America feel like they have a massive disconnect from the homeland, if that makes sense. This would be like Britain being conquered right before the American Revolution, and then like all the people in the English colonies being told we're French now, and that's not what they wanted to do, etc., etc. And so many Creoles feel like this is their opportunity to like take control, and it's really Napoleon's conquest of Old Spain or Napoleon's conquest that causes Old Spain to lose control of Latin America. This is the last tie between pieces of Latin America and the various principalities and stuff they've set up, and the continent, and that tie is severed with Napoleon's conquest. And then when he marches on Lisbon and he marches on Portugal, um, actually the Portuguese court, in order to get away, they don't want the same fate as that. They actually relocate with the help of Great Britain. Great trivia question. The oldest peace treaty in the entire world exists between Portugal and Great Britain going back to the 1200s or so. But they actually relocate with the help of Great Britain all the way to Rio de Janeiro. And so we've actually got European kings living in Rio de Janeiro, and governing from there. And actually, as you'll find, I told you the Creoles started to like feel like they were significantly closer to the areas in which they were born rather than the peninsulars who came older. Once the king in Rio has his own kid, that kid's going to be like, I don't want to go back to Portugal. I'm not Portuguese at all. I'm Brazilian, right? And so the Peninsular War, which is what Napoleon's conquest of Iberia is known as, really helps like further these South American revolutions. Okay, and we're going to talk about what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Napoleon over the next day or two, and then we'll come back to South America, and we'll actually spend the last week of the unit kind of going back and forth between Napoleon and South America and stuff along those lines. In the end, what you're going to see is three key groups of revolutions in Latin America here. There's going to be a big rebellion in Mexico, there's going to be a uniquely Brazilian revolution, and then there's going to be what we call the Bolivarian revolutions. And these are set up by the great liberator Simon Bolivar, who helps basically liberate large parts of Latin America. And we'll talk about how successful that is and stuff like that. This leads to a ton of different ideas that we'll talk about the rise of caudillos and conservatism, etc., etc. What you should know is that is two key things that come out of these revolutions that you should make sure you write down. Not the worry about the caudillos conservative and stuff like that, but you should realize that by the end of these revolutions, because we'll talk way more about the caudillos and stuff like that later, by the end of these revolutions, the church is generally able to keep power in ways it hadn't had in Europe, and that by 1830, everywhere except for Cuba is independent in Latin America. And as I said, what we're going to do is we're going to spend some time looking at Napoleon, and then we'll break down some of these revolutions a little bit more and look at what happened and like kind of been able to wrap up our like Enlightenment, transatlantic revolutions, and Napoleon unit. So as I said, check this out if you didn't get a chance to do it in class, and I will talk to you guys more soon.